a man suddenly found himself in another world, a place he recognized at once. It was the setting of a fantasy novel he had once read. In an unexpected twist of fate, he had become the story's main villain. His new identity was Alban Audren, a nobleman with a wretched personality, arrogant, lazy, and cunning enough to manipulate others into doing everything for him. Born to parents who died when he was young, Alban's life had always been a spiral of decay. The man who now inhabited his body realized that if he followed the story's original path, he would soon end up penniless and broken. While changing clothes, he remembered the critical point of Alban's downfall, a duel at the academy that would mark the beginning of his ruin. Yet, rather than despair, he resolved to change his fate. For a start, he would no longer be the idle, overweight noble who could not lift a sword. At that moment, his elderly butler 𝕂𝕬𝕬 entered the room. Though stoic in appearance, 𝕂𝕬𝕬 was deeply loyal to his master. When he saw Alban dressing himself, shock crossed his face. The real Alban had been so indolent he would not even bother to dress without help. Startled, Alban hastily claimed he was merely in a hurry. 𝕂𝕬𝕬, overwhelmed by even this small sign of initiative, shed tears of joy. Seeking to steer the conversation away, Alban made an unexpected request. With new determination, he announced his intent to lose weight and to learn swordsmanship under 𝕂𝕬𝕬's guidance. The butler was speechless. He shook his young master's shoulders in disbelief, suspecting illness or delirium. Yet, Alban's expression was resolute. He knew nothing certain of his future, only that he must change it if he wished to survive. Half in jest, he remarked that no woman would ever want a man as slothful and unattractive as he currently was. 𝕂𝕬𝕬 frowned in confusion, for to him a noble title was more than enough to attract any woman. But as he studied his master's earnest expression, his doubt gave way to resolve. If Alban truly wished to learn, 𝕂𝕬𝕬 would train him without restraint. A week later, Alban's body was on the verge of collapse. Every muscle ached, and 𝕂𝕬𝕬's training was merciless. Despite his age, the old butler moved with extraordinary speed, effortlessly parrying each clumsy attack and countering with precision. At the end of each exhausting day, Alban considered quitting. He wondered if slower, gentler training might suffice. 𝕂𝕬𝕬 dismissed the idea. Such a pace, he explained, would take 3 years to bear fruit. 3 years was time Alban did not have. Gritting his teeth, trembling, he forced himself to stand and continue. 𝕂𝕬𝕬 laughed, not in mockery but in approval. Seeing his young master's determination, he raised his sword and prepared the next lesson. Weeks turned into months. The first month brought only pain. In the second, Alban began to match 𝕂𝕬𝕬's rhythm. By the third, he could finally keep pace with his master's movements, a progress so rapid it startled even the old warrior. By the end of their training, Alban's body had transformed. The soft, indolent noble had become lean and steady, his eyes sharp and focused. Convinced of his progress, 𝕂𝕬𝕬 decided to test his abilities beyond the courtyard. They journeyed to a nearby dungeon said to house only weak monsters. There, 𝕂𝕬𝕬 would judge whether Alban's new strength could withstand a true battle. Not far inside, they spotted a goblin, a low-rank creature wandering alone. 𝕂𝕬𝕬 signaled for Alban to engage. Moving quietly, Alban approached from behind, but the goblin sensed him and lunged. 𝕂𝕬𝕬 did not interfere. He had expected the boy's enthusiasm to fade after a few days of hardship, yet what he witnessed proved otherwise. With calm precision, Alban sidestepped the creature's attack and struck it down in a single blow. His movements were fluid, his gaze cold and focused, like that of a born killer. 𝕂𝕬𝕬's pride swelled. Moments later, a pack of goblins emerged from the shadows. 𝕂𝕬𝕬 remained still, watching as Alban fought on. His sword flashed again and again, cutting through his enemies without hesitation or mercy. By the time silence returned, the ground was littered with bodies. 𝕂𝕬𝕬's chest tightened with emotion. His young master, once idle and hopeless, had become a true swordsman. Ruthless, disciplined, and frighteningly gifted. He approached at last and told Alban that there was nothing more he could teach. The killing light faded from Alban's eyes, replaced by quiet disbelief. Then, at last, a smile broke across his face. Months of effort had not been in vain. 6 months passed in peace. One morning, however, Alban burst into alarm upon hearing that a marriage proposal had arrived. His excitement was immediate. At last, he thought, his new life was bearing fruit. But 𝕂𝕬𝕬 hesitated before revealing the sender, the 𝕂𝕚𝕬𝕗𝕦 family. Alban froze. A duke's family? For a baron's son? The realization struck him with dread. He remembered the novel's plot. The original Alban had indeed married a woman of higher standing, Leticia Barrow, a notorious troublemaker whose engagement had once been annulled for her misconduct, a true villain like the original Alban. Dropping to his knees, Alban could only stare in despair. 6 months of change, all his struggle and sweat, and the story was still steering him toward the same fate. Sabas, unaware of his young master's turmoil, added thoughtfully that Lady Leticia was well known for her difficult personality. Alban wanted nothing more than to reject the engagement. The thought of having Leticia as his wife already felt like a curse waiting to happen. Yet, when Sabas, his loyal butler, reminded him that refusing the proposal would turn the Barrow family into enemies, Alban knew he had no choice. An open conflict between noble houses was out of the question. Sabas tried to offer comfort, assuring his master that an alliance with the Barrows would strengthen their position and guarantee Alban's safety. But Alban's expression darkened. He couldn't share what troubled him, for only he knew the truth of this world, the original plot of the novel he now lived in. Curious despite himself, Alban asked about Leticia's latest scandals. Sabas, repeating what rumors he'd heard, spoke of tax embezzlement, of young men sneaking into her mansion, and of a lavish lifestyle funded by her former fiancé's fortune. Leticia's reputation, in short, was a disaster. The news left Alban pale. No matter how hard he tried to steer his life away from its destined course, the story seemed determined to repeat itself. When the time came to meet her, he was tense and guarded. The household stood in formation, awaiting their guest. But the moment Leticia stepped down from her carriage, Alban froze. The woman who emerged was nothing like the infamous villainess he had imagined. Her movements were graceful, her presence composed, her beauty disarming. When she greeted him, there was not a trace of cruelty in her eyes. Sabas approached first, inquiring about her attendants, but Leticia had arrived alone. She merely requested a brief tour of the mansion before anyone could question further. The household exchanged glances. No noble lady of her rank should travel unescorted. When Alban later asked for Sabas's impression, the butler admitted that her aura felt strangely different, as if something about her was out of place. Alban quietly agreed. The woman's demeanor did not match her reputation. Beneath her calm exterior, he sensed a kind of quiet wisdom that rumors could not explain. He ordered Sabas to investigate Leticia discreetly, while he planned to observe her himself. To Sabas's relief, Leticia was nothing like the deranged woman he had expected. In fact, he dared to hope that she might prove a suitable partner for his young master after all. During their first dinner together, Alban made every effort to engage her, even attempting humor, but Leticia remained distant, her responses brief and cool. When the meal ended, she rose without ceremony and left the room, not impolite, simply indifferent. Days passed in the same rhythm. Leticia avoided him at every turn, and Alban's patience wore thin. Sabas reminded him that his reputation still cast a long shadow, and perhaps she needed time to trust again. Alban understood, yet the thought of giving up never crossed his mind. Driven by frustration, he chased after her one afternoon, hoping to invite her for a walk. But Leticia ignored him completely, quickening her pace until she reached her room, slamming the door behind her. He returned to his quarters, disheartened. Nothing he did seemed to reach her. The longer he thought, the clearer it became that gentle persistence would not be enough. There was only one method left, one the original Alban would have used without hesitation. He went to her door again and knocked. There was no response. After a long pause, he drew his sword. A sharp grin crossed his face. He'll play along with ℕ𝕒𝕦𝕗𝕦. In a single sweep, he struck. The door shattered into fragments, the sound echoing through the hall. Leticia's startled scream followed immediately, her expression frozen in disbelief as Alban stepped through the wreckage. He apologized with a laugh, though his tone carried no true remorse. Leticia's anger flared. She demanded to know how he could act so shamelessly, breaking into a lady's room without permission. He only chuckled in response. After all, the original Alban was a scumbag, the kind who would do anything to get what he wanted. Closing the distance between them, his grin softened into something deceptively gentle. Asked Leticia to go on date with him. Leticia finally, though reluctantly, agreed to Alban's request. Together they walked through the forest. The air was crisp and filled with the scent of pine, something Alban thought she would appreciate. Yet Leticia's sharp remark broke his optimism. She admitted the air was indeed refreshing, but only when he was not around. Alban exhaled heavily. The wall she had built between them still stood firm. It was not surprising. No woman in this land would easily trust the original Alban, the one infamous for his shameless reputation. Seeking to ease the tension, Alban suggested climbing to the mountain's peak to enjoy the view. Leticia refused. She was unaccustomed to steep paths, and her long dress made it even more troublesome. Irritation flickered in her voice. He had never mentioned that they would be hiking, and her shoes were far from suitable. Realizing his mistake, Alban offered to carry her, smiling faintly as he did so. At least this way, she would not soil her gown or tire herself out. Leticia hesitated, pride and embarrassment warring within her, but eventually allowed it, albeit with a stern warning not to cross any lines. Alban, flustered yet composed, lifted her easily. The training he had undergone with Sebas had paid off. He carried her effortlessly, the gesture surprisingly natural. The climb was quiet, marked only by the rustle of leaves and the wind brushing through the trees. When they finally reached the summit, the landscape unfolded before them in breathtaking silence. For a moment, even Leticia's guarded expression softened. From there, the whole of Audren spread beneath their feet, bathed in sunlight and mist. Pride stirred within Alban. This was the sight he had long wanted her to see. From this height, their homeland seemed boundless and alive. If she were to become his wife, this would be the land they governed together. To him, viewing it from above felt like a promise, a fitting beginning to the future they would share. As he set her down, Leticia regarded him with a newfound calm. She admitted quietly that he was unlike what the rumors had painted. The men of the Audren family were said to be arrogant, insolent brutes, yet the man before her was far from it. Alban only laughed, dismissing the talk with ease. He was no thug, merely a man too fond of leisure. With a faint grin, he added that he was, in truth, the villain of his own domain. Leticia's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. The idea of someone declaring himself a villain amused her. The lightness in her laughter struck Alban deeply. In that instant, he understood that her smile was something precious, something worth protecting. The air between them grew gentler after that. When they stopped by a waterfall, Leticia played freely in the shallow water, her earlier reserve forgotten. Alban stood at the edge, watching her with quiet satisfaction. They exchanged light remarks and shared brief laughter, simple, fleeting, but enough to bridge the distance between them. Encouraged by the change, Alban suggested they learn more about one another. Leticia spoke first, her full name, her fondness for black tea and scones, her lack of hobbies except for spending time with children. When his turn came, Alban admitted his love for food, especially steak, though he tried to restrain himself from overeating. His hobbies, he added simply, were sword training and idleness. Leticia found that amusing. The contrast between discipline and sloth suited him more than he realized. Their peaceful moment ended abruptly when the forest trembled with the roar of a monster. A massive creature emerged from the shadows, its form towering and feral. Leticia froze, while Alban remained composed. It was only a killer bear, a beast that had long plagued the outskirts of Audren, devouring its crops and threatening its people. Leticia urged him to flee, panic rising in her voice. Alban did not move. The creature's gaze was fixed on her, sensing her weakness. Without hesitation, he stepped forward. One swift strike of his sword was all it took. The beast fell instantly, the ground quaking under its weight. In that brief moment, his expression turned cold and sharp, a glimpse of the warrior he truly was. When the silence returned, Leticia tried to compose herself, insisting that she was merely startled. Yet, Alban saw the tremor in her hands, the faint fear she tried to conceal. Regret washed over him. He approached gently, brushing his hand against her cheek in a rare gesture of tenderness. His voice, low and steady, carried only reassurance. To him, her safety was enough. Leticia's gaze wavered. Something in her expression shifted, a mix of confusion and unease. She asked quietly why he was being so kind to her. Her words hung heavy in the air, followed by another that cut deeper. Their engagement, she reminded him, was a matter of politics. There was no need for kindness where no affection was meant to exist. Alban smiled faintly, though his eyes turned distant. Outwardly, he brushed it off with charm, but inwardly, his purpose was clear. He wished to understand her, to uncover what had happened to her and who had caused her pain. Yet, Leticia only shook her head. Her voice dropped to a whisper, laced with resignation. For the sake of the Audren family's safety, she told him, it would be better if he treated her cruelly. Leticia has a backstory. She had been promised to a duke since the age of 5. His name was 𝕉𝕬𝕪𝕒𝕬𝕝, a title gilded with prestige and power, the kind of match any noble family would consider a blessing. As a child, she imagined him to be a man of honor, a protector, someone capable of carrying both his duties and her hopes. Yet, when the years passed and innocence fell away, the man behind the title revealed himself as nothing more than a disappointment. 𝕂𝕠𝕠 was arrogant, indulgent, and corrupt to the core, surrounded by mistresses, obsessed with parties, and driven by lust and vanity rather than reason. When Leticia, already grown and educated, tried to confront him about the heavy taxes burdening his people, 𝕂𝕠𝕠 only laughed. He dismissed her warnings with cruelty, calling her a mere political pawn, a barrow daughter sold for convenience, unworthy of interfering in his affairs. The insult struck deep. Shame and anger twisted together as she realized the man she had once looked up to was not only unworthy of love, but dangerous in his indifference. Determined to see the truth for herself, Leticia ventured into the city. What she found shattered any last remnants of her patience. Streets were filled with starving children and thieves born from desperation. Disease crept through the alleys, and death hung in the air like fog. 𝕂𝕠𝕠's neglect had hollowed his lands from within, and no one in power seemed willing to act. Helpless yet unwilling to turn away, Leticia made a desperate choice. If 𝕂𝕠𝕠 would not use the collected taxes to save his people, then she would. Under the cover of night, she slipped into the castle's vaults and took what had been hoarded for greed. For 3 years, she worked quietly, her compassion hidden behind secrecy. But secrets in noble circles never remain buried. During a grand ball before an audience of lords and ladies, 𝕂𝕠𝕠 revealed her supposed betrayal. He accused her of theft, claiming years of missing tax funds as evidence. The crowd turned on her instantly, their disbelief curdling into scorn. 𝕂𝕠𝕠 refused her any chance to defend herself, declaring her guilty before all. Stripped of her engagement and banished from the 𝕂𝕠𝕠 estate, Leticia endured the humiliation without tears. She bowed her head only once, offering neither excuse nor plea, and walked away with what little dignity she had left. 𝕂𝕠𝕠's new fiancé stood beside him as the final mockery of what had once been her life. Half a year passed before another engagement was arranged, this time with a man named Alban. Leticia accepted without hope. Rumors painted Alban as no better than 𝕂𝕠𝕠, another selfish aristocrat born into privilege and vice. She wondered if this was divine punishment for her crime, a cruel echo of her past repeating itself. Yet, when she met him, Alban defied every expectation. He was warm, light-hearted, and sincere, gentle in manner, but firm in principle. He looked at her not as a scandal, but as a person, and that simple kindness disarmed her more than any grand gesture could. Still, fear anchored her heart. The stain of her past, 𝕂𝕠𝕠's influence, and her own guilt left her uncertain whether to trust again. She hesitated between protecting herself through distance or risking everything for the possibility of genuine affection. Unbeknownst to her, the truth was already uncovered. Sēbās, Alban's loyal butler, had investigated her past and brought his findings to his master. The revelation ignited Alban's fury. The idea that 𝕂𝕠𝕠 had ruined Leticia's name filled him with unrestrained rage, thoughts of revenge already forming in his mind. Yet, Sēbās interrupted his anger with quiet clarity. Leticia had indeed taken the tax money, but not for greed. She had used it to build shelters for the impoverished, to feed children left to die on the streets, and to ease the suffering 𝕂𝕠𝕠's corruption had caused. Her so-called crime had been an act of salvation. The truth tempered Alban's wrath into resolve. Relief came first, followed by a cold, deliberate focus. Leticia had suffered for her compassion, her reputation torn apart by the man who had failed his people. When he asked Sēbās for his honest opinion, the butler called 𝕂𝕠𝕠 what he was, a despicable fool, unworthy of mercy. Alban agreed. His anger no longer burned hot. It hardened into something sharper. He will use the actual villain's method, which is truly cruel. ℍ𝕒𝕠𝕠 would answer for every injustice he had buried. The following morning, during breakfast, Leticia was taken aback. Without warning, Alban began to calmly speak of his plan to bring down Duke 𝕂𝕠𝕠, his tone casual as he cut through a slice of steak. Between slow, unhurried bites, he mentioned having already spread a rumor, one claiming that 𝕂𝕚𝕠𝕠 intended to take revenge on Duke 𝕂𝕠𝕠 for wronging Lady Leticia. There was even a hint of amusement in his expression, as if he found the chaos he had sown mildly entertaining. Leticia's disbelief flared into alarm. Such a rumor could only invite disaster. Declaring open hostility toward Moro meant inviting retaliation, yet Alban remained composed. He assured her that he had spread another rumor simultaneously, one that painted an entirely different picture. This time, the tale spoke of Alban secretly bribing Moro with a large sum of money to dispose of Leticia in secret. The contradictions were deliberate. In Alban's eyes, confusion was the most effective weapon against those with malicious intent. Inconsistency bred curiosity, and curiosity invited greed. He knew the rumors would reach Moro's ears soon enough. Far away in the 𝕬𝕤𝕦𝕗𝕦 estate, Moro was counting tax silver when the whispers reached him. 2 rumors, both impossible to ignore, one that spoke of revenge, another of conspiracy. And soon after, even stranger tales followed, claims that Leticia had been imprisoned, treated like refuse, and hidden away. Moro frowned, then smirked, his suspicions aligning neatly with his prejudice. Knowing Alban's long-standing reputation for arrogance and cruelty, he found the darker story easier to believe. In his mind, Leticia's virtue and Alban's corruption could never coexist. To him, their engagement was already doomed. The idea that Alban might truly seek her death began to sound disturbingly plausible. This reaction was precisely what Alban had foreseen. Once a villain himself, he understood how the wicked thought, how easily suspicion could twist into conviction. Yet, rumors alone would not be enough. To complete their plan, he needed Leticia's cooperation. Leticia refused at first. She did not wish to drag the 𝕂𝕠𝕟 family into her personal vengeance. Alban accepted her hesitation. He explained that this was not merely about avenging her humiliation. Moro's cruelty toward the people was reason enough to act. He had already uncovered the truth behind the so-called embezzlement, how Leticia had taken tax money not for greed, but to aid the starving villagers of her territory. Silence lingered before Leticia asked, almost in a whisper, whether he regretted standing by her after learning the truth. Alban's answer was simple. He did not. Knowing her true heart only strengthened his resolve. From that moment onward, he vowed to protect her for the rest of his life. Then, with rare sincerity, he told her that no power, neither heaven nor earth, could make him harm her. Leticia's composure crumbled. Tears welled in her eyes as disbelief gave way to quiet gratitude. Alban's expression, however, soon darkened again. For that same reason, he said, Moro could not be forgiven. The man would answer for every ounce of suffering he had caused. Leticia brushed her tears away, a faint smile touching her lips at his words. To her, he seemed nothing like the villain others believed him to be. Yet, Alban merely replied that a true villain was one who would protect what he cherished, no matter the cost. Days later, the plan unfolded. Leticia arrived at the 𝕂𝕠𝕟 estate's food warehouse, a quiet, dimly lit place that smelled faintly of grain and dust. She waited, calm but alert, until footsteps echoed at the entrance. Moro arrived with several guards and his newly fiancée, a smug satisfaction on his face as though he had already claimed victory. Feigning surprise, Leticia greeted him politely. Moro wasted no time producing a letter, one she had written herself, or so he believed. In it, Leticia complained of Baron 𝕂𝕠𝕟's cruelty, of her despair and exhaustion, begging Duke Moro to rescue her from an unbearable engagement. At first, Moro pretended to sympathize, reading her supposed pleas with feigned pity. Then his demeanor shifted, his sympathy broke into laughter, harsh and mocking. The sound echoed coldly through the warehouse as he called out to someone hidden among the shadows. From the darkness, Alban emerged, sword in hand. Leticia froze. Moro smirked with satisfaction, claiming that he and Alban had already reached an understanding long before the letter had been sent. He mocked Leticia's naivety, confessing his long-standing hatred toward her stiffness, her lack of charm, her refusal to yield to him. As the daughter of Duke Barrow, she had once been untouchable. Now, with Alban's supposed loyalty, vengeance was finally within his grasp. He placed a hand on Alban's shoulder and gave his final order, to kill her. Leticia's breath caught, her pulse quickening in terror. Alban raised his sword. Then, everything changed. In a single motion, the steel flashed, not toward Leticia, but toward Moro's guards. They fell before they could even react. The air filled with the sound of metal meeting flesh, a blur of motion too swift to follow. Within seconds, the room was silent. Moro's composure shattered into horror. Alban lowered his blade, his steps unhurried as he approached. His voice was calm, his expression faintly amused, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He mocked the guard's lack of skill, then turned to Leticia with quiet approval, praising her flawless performance. Her eyes met his, steady and composed. The plan had succeeded perfectly. Then, together, they faced Morrow. Leticia's gentle smile curved into something sharper, colder, and for the first time, Morrow understood the truth. He had not outsmarted them. He had walked straight into their trap.